Happy Thursday, Dog Nation. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and this is going to be a really fun show. Here's what we're going to do off the top today. We're going to go back and look at the recent past for UGA as a way of possibly suggesting what we might see next Saturday against Clemson. I think this will be fun for you. We'll do that here coming up in a couple of minutes' time. The Georgia Athletic Director has done kind of a cool thing that I don't think is going to get probably a lot of attention. We're going to give it a little bit of a spotlight here today. We'll go look at the very humorous and emerging personality that Sam Pittman's put on display at Arkansas. Of course, the former Georgia offensive line coach. That'll be good stuff. Terrence Edwards going to stop by there today, too. We are kind of the calm before the storm, before things get really heated up next Saturday in Charlotte against Clemson. Dog Nation invasion to the Queen City for that one. So let's keep the conversation going. We'll start it now. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
One of the weird things about life is that memories, even memories from only a short time ago, are not particularly reliable. Sometimes the way you remember things, not exactly the way that it necessarily once was or actually was in reality. I'll give you an example of that. One of the best memories for me in my entire sporting life. I spent my entire lifetime as a sports fan, obviously a huge UGA fan. We talk about that all the time. And I don't know that I've ever had a more enjoyable experience than being in South Bend in 2017 to see all those Georgia fans, 40, 50,000, whatever it was, completely take over that stadium, take over the third largest metropolitan area in the country, Chicago, in the days leading up to the game. And, culminating in that win in this hallowed venue that I've been watching on TV my entire life. I can tell you, and many of you were there with me or you were there as a part of it, it doesn't get any better than that, right? It's incredibly enjoyable. And there are so many things that can kind of stick in your mind about that game, whether it's the unbelievable catch by Terry Godwin, which was obviously one of the best in UGA history. For some reason, I'm always thinking about like Davin Bellamy and Lorenzo Carter, what they did that day getting after Brandon Wimbush, the Notre Dame quarterback, and those are like the indelible images from the game. But for whatever reason, the thing that I actually almost personally about the game remember more than the Carter Bellamy stuff against Wimbush or the Terry Godwin touchdown catch, I just remember being in awe of Roquan Smith that day. And it is really weird to think about this now in that obviously Roquan would go on to be the Buckus Award winner, like a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, and literally without any kind of hesitation, you can say that he's one of the greatest Georgia Bulldogs of all time. I mean, certainly on a single season basis, the list of guys who've performed better than Roquan is not very big. He went on the course of 1 year into the highest rafters of the Georgia History Museum. Roquan Smith put himself all over that with the basis of the way that he played in 2017. And that game against Notre Dame was the day that I realized that, man, this is a really pretty special football player. And it seems like looking back on how good Roquan became, that you would always be thinking that about Roquan. The truth is, if you want to go back to the year prior in Kirby Smart's first year in 2016, and listen, this is not anything to shake a stick at. Roquan was good, but it's not like everybody in America knew who Roquan Smith was. I think he had about 95 tackles. I think he was like a second or third team All-SEC guy. Honestly, my memory somewhat fails on that. Maybe that's not true, but it's kind of my memory of it. I'm pretty sure he had 95 tackles. The point is, that's a good player and, kind of not necessarily to that level of great. And I remember thinking at the Notre Dame game, wow, this guy, he's just levitating from one side of the field to the other. I mentioned Wimbush, the Notre Dame quarterback, a moment ago. That's a guy that you had to be careful of with his legs, and it just seems like Roquan Smith was wherever he was all night long. And I mentioned on the top of the show that sometimes it seems like memories, kind of fail you a little bit. When I go back and look at Roquan based on the way that I remember him playing that day, the way that he was flying all over the field, I almost would assume he'd have like 100 tackles or something, right? It's like I almost assume that the stat sheet would absolutely reflect everything about what I remember Roquan doing. And the truth is, he had good numbers. He had a tackle for loss. He had a sack. I think he had 7 total tackles. But it's almost like I expected the stat sheet to be even bigger for Roquan. because of the way that my mind remembers him looking there on that field. But clearly for me, that was such a huge coming out party for him, and obviously what he would do over the course of the next few weeks, I think validated it even more. As a way of just kind of putting a punctuation mark on this, let's go back and hear Roquan Smith talking about himself, his defense's performance in that game against Notre Dame, and the feeling of pulling out that win in South Bend. Remember, that's a close game down to the wire. Every defensive play mattered. Roquan made plenty. This is what he said back in September of 2017.
We play lights out, man. So we do what we have to do, play within the system, and it's what we do at Georgia. So I'm just so proud of those guys, man, and it's an awesome feeling. The big win is early in the season. It's game 2. It's a great, awesome win. We're gonna enjoy it. It's an awesome feeling, being able to beat Notre Dame here, and they're an awesome team. So it feels amazing.
There's always a lot of background noise for those kind of interview situations like that. That's way back in the ancient times when interviews took place in public, so there's a little bit of background noise, but hopefully you could hear that okay. The phrase that Roquan uses a lot, or I should say that he uses there that I love a lot, is the idea that it was a, quote, lights-out performance in the Georgia defense. And I would say that Roquan himself led the way, along with Davin Bellamy and Lorenzo Carter, for really producing, once again, great phrase there, lights-out performance for the Georgia defense. So let's think about now for a moment. If in the second game of the 2017 season, we suddenly found out that, oh my gosh, Roquan Smith, this is more than just a good player, solid contributor on a decent defense. This is one of the best players in the country, regardless of position. He's going to win a national award. He's going to be a top 10 pick, and he's going to almost single-handedly propel the Georgia defense to greatness there that season. Hopefully the parallel here you're starting to notice that much the same way that Georgia fans didn't have to wait very long back in 2017 to find out who one of their true star players is going to be for that 2017 season, Roquan introduced himself very quickly. I mean, the same thing could be true for Georgia against Clemson next Saturday. And we've talked about this so much, and some of you are right there with me on this. Some of you say, BA, you've talked about this too much. But this is one of those things where I truly believe that leaders really are repeaters, and we're going to repeat it over and over, that college football has become a stars game. And Roquan Smith was a superstar for Georgia in 2017. Easy to spot. You could bring your Aunt Gertrude, who's never watched a college football game, sit her next to you. She's going to see this guy flying all over the field more so than anybody else. It was obvious that he was either among the very best players in the field or the best player on any field that he stepped on there in 2017. And it's obvious for Georgia right now as we head towards the 2021 season that there are a number of guys who have that same level of potential this year to introduce themselves to the country on September 4th against Clemson as more than just good players, because in 2016, that's all you would have thought Roquan Smith was. In 2016, there's nothing wrong with being a good player. That's not an insult. But in 2016, you thought Roquan Smith was a good player. Very early in 2017, on a big national TV game that was on NBC that night, all of a sudden Roquan Smith says, no, I'm not a good player anymore. I'm a great player. Hi, my name is Roquan Smith. I'm on my way to the NFL. And that's what it's going to take to beat Clemson. And y'all all know that. And one of the things that may feel a Georgia fan with some angst is, well, Georgia fans don't know who those guys necessarily are. But if you're watching on video right now, you see Nakobe Dean on your screen. That's one. He's gotten a preseason All-SEC nod. You see Jordan Davis on your screen a moment ago. That's another. That's a guy who could go from being, and I would say in the case of Jordan Davis in previous years, he's been more than just good, but maybe the country doesn't know about him yet. But they may all know about him by the time this year's done. Trayvon Walker's a guy like that who could be on defense. Your Roquan Smith doesn't have to be on defense. It'd be nice if it was, obviously, but it doesn't have to be on defense. It could be Jermaine Burton. Y'all, I mean, don't forget for a moment that the coaches around the SEC, even though Jermaine Burton was just a freshman a year ago, and even though his moments of brilliance kind of came in, sporadic bursts, not necessarily consistently over the course of the full season, they still gave him the third-team All-SEC nod. There's a chance that the Roquan Smith-like emergence for UGA happens for a guy playing on offense. It could be a Burton. It could be one of your running backs who right now you think of as an ensemble player, but maybe steps out from that group to become a little bit more of a star-type performer, the kind of person that kids all across the SEC footprint know all about. It's both, the important factor for winning the game. You have to have these guys emerge versus Clemson. but it's one of the things that makes the Clemson game on September the 4th so much fun, is that by the time we all get back here on I think it's the 7th is a Monday. Ironically, that's also my wife's birthday. But by the time we get back there on that Monday, maybe we're talking about an offseason of saying, boy, we wondered who the star players for Georgia were going to be, but lo and behold, look what happened Saturday night there against Clemson in Charlotte. Look at this guy who put this team on his back for a quarter or a half or a full game. Look at this guy who's now nationally known and being talked about on ESPN and every other place that college football fans kind of congregate because of what he did on the big stage against Clemson with Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit and Holly Rowe and the biggest TV team in the country calling all this stuff. Look who became a star for Georgia, or look at the handful of guys who became a star for Georgia. That's what it can be next Saturday against Clemson. Now, let me give you one more thing on this. I saw where our friends over at Pro Football Focus, they have some bold predictions, and if they're going to be bold predictions, they got to be bold. They can't just be within the typical parameters of what could be normally expected to happen. One of their writers says that he thinks that Clemson is going to beat Georgia by double digits in Week 1. The writer says Georgia's got a talented team, deserves its top 5 ranking, but Clemson is just set up far better for early success. The mention here is the injuries to Darnell Washington, Tyke Smith, JT Daniels set to take over a full year after closing the 4 games last year as the starting quarterback. He says the 2018 5-star was exceptional his debut against Mississippi State, but recorded a sub-50 passing grade and 4 turnover-worthy plays against Cincinnati. Brent Venables, the Clemson defensive coordinator, and the rest of that defense going to be a test for Daniels. It'll be our first indication of whether the quarterback has taken a step forward. The Tigers are a 3.5-point favorite of the Bulldogs in the Week 1 showdown, but this Pro Football Focus guy says they win by 10 or more points. And the phrase there that sticks out to me is the one there at the end. This is going to be our first indication of whether or not JT Daniels has taken a step forward. And obviously, that's true. This is the first chance for Daniels to show how much better he is in 2021. But here's the thing that you also got to consider if you're a Clemson fan that happens to be peering in today and watching our conversation or listening to it via podcast. It's not just Daniels who has a chance to take a step forward. It is Jermaine Burton, or it is Kendall Milton, or it is Zamir White. It is Marcus Rosemead, Jack Saint. It is on defense, former 5-stars like Nolan Smith or Trayvon Walker, Adam Anderson, or Nakobe Dean. You could really list them going on and on and on and on. And the odds are not every one of those players is going to have the kind of season that those of us who dress in red and black frequently, not every one of those players is going to have the kind of season we all want them to. That's just the nature of football. It's just a really hard sport at the very, very highest level. But man, when you think about that long list of potential, when you think about all the guys that could, as Pro Football Focus says, take the step forward, suddenly the team that, whether it be PFF or ESPN or whatever other acronym you want to think of here, suddenly the team that a lot of the media thinks is coming to Charlotte to play Clemson, all of a sudden that team actually shows you, no, this is more than just potential now. This former 5-star outside linebacker, he's all grown up. This interior defensive lineman who's a good space eater, all of a sudden he's a playmaker in the backfield too. This running back that you think is kind of by committee, all of a sudden now there are well-known names that fit into the same sentence with guys like DeAndre Swift or Nick Chubb or Sony Michel. That's what next Saturday can be about. Now, maybe this PFF dude ends up being right, and maybe none of these stars emerge, and it's just another disappointing day for Georgia like some of these big games have been in recent years. Certainly there's a possibility that ends up being true. I think there are a lot of Georgia fans, as you get close to the game, starting to show a little bit of optimism, starting to show a little bit of excitement that even with the injuries and even with no George Pickens and some of the stuff that's gone on over the course of the last few weeks, the list of guys who can break out, the list of guys, to use the phrase that Roquan Smith used back in 2007, the list of guys that can play lights out for Georgia next Saturday against Clemson is actually pretty long. And tuning in to see which of those guys truly emerge, which of those guys become stars before our very eyes and maybe lead Georgia to the victory, boy, that sounds like really good entertainment just 2 Saturdays from now. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Meriwether and Tharp, and glad to have you with us, however you get to us, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. I tell you, the platforms on video that are just growing in popularity so much, and it's so much fun to see this because, technologically, it's the most amazing thing to me. The fact that so many people are now watching right there in the DawgNation app, what an incredible thing that is. Watching right there on DawgNation.com, which is a really cool thing. I just think this is going to be, as we move through the season, I think people actually watching it on DawgNation.com in the DawgNation app is going to end up being a very, very popular outlet for reasons that we'll be talking about more in the days to come. In fact, tomorrow on the show, right around this time, I actually have a really fun announcement, something we haven't done before. We're going to do it, and I know some of you are going to say, oh, BA, you're not going to be able to pull this off, but I think we're going to do this. I think it's going to be great, and I'll tell you about it tomorrow. Also, podcasts, of course, all those podcast platforms. Right there at the world-famous DawgNation.com. We post the show every day. Our friends in Athens on the radio, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. We love hearing from them each and every day. So much good stuff and so many great ways for us to connect with you, and we're glad that you're able to connect with us however you get to us. And, of course, it would not be possible without our friends at Merriweather and Tharp. I love Merriweather and Tharp, and I'm actually excited that Bob and his family are going to be with us for DawgNation Invasion. That's one of the things I love about Merriweather and Tharp. They love having a good time. Bob, Ashley, his whole family, they're big-time dog fans. Love hanging out with them. Can't wait to do that in Charlotte next weekend. And, of course, sometimes they also have to roll up their sleeves, get serious, get busy there as well when it comes to the real work that they have to do. And, listen, they provide a great service for so many people in our audience there as well, because while it's not always pleasant to think about, it is always ever present in terms of reality for many. The divorce process, right? It can be scary and confusing. You may find yourself going through it right now. You may have been through it and kind of think back on what a time that was, or you may be considering the possibility that's on the horizon for you. If that's the case, then obviously my sympathy goes out to you. Truly, and I say this sincerely, my prayers are for you on that, because I know it's not the event that you planned for years ago, but it's the event that you're dealing with right now, and it's time to have a plan for it right now. And that's why you want to have a strong advocate on your side. My friends at Merriweather and Tharp, I love telling their story, because here's what I know they do for people. They help make you whole again. They help make the next season of your life more enjoyable than the one that you might be in right now, and that matters. Taking advantage of all that life has to offer and setting yourself up for happiness in those seasons of life. It's so, so important. That's what Merriweather and Tharp can do for you. Free resources online, theatlantadivorceteam.com. Theatlantadivorceteam.com is the website. Free initial consultation. But after that, it's time to put them to work and say, hey, I got a relationship with my children, I got finances, I got all kinds of things I got to think about. How does the law work for me, and how can I use that to my advantage and understand all of the intricacies of that law? That's what Merriweather and Tharp will do for you. They are your source for Georgia divorce. You can find them online, theatlantadivorceteam.com. Once again, theatlantadivorceteam.com. It is a Thursday for us, and on Thursdays for quite a long time now, that has been a chance to talk to the former Georgia wide receiver Terrence Edwards. Looking forward to doing that here in a couple of moments. We'll talk to Terrence about everything that's kind of be expected to unfold next Saturday against Clemson. Of course, I'm sure one of the things that will also come up there was that Terrence was a part of a Georgia team that also beat Clemson to open the season in 2002, and that's obviously still a memory that he very much enjoys, and all that starts to seem really relevant here as we head towards the upcoming season there, too. So good stuff with Terrence Edwards here in just a moment. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse, and it's presented today by our friends at ServPro. And if you don't mind, I want to go away from the on-field football product for a moment, and I want to talk about something that I think that matters that some Georgia fans might not give attention to. And I'm actually going to do something I almost never do, which is give at least a semi-free plug for a potential advertiser here. So Georgia Athletic Director Josh Brooks said something yesterday on Twitter that got my attention. I thought this was really cool. So Brooks talking about an in-stadium enhancement that the Dogs are looking to employ for the upcoming season. Of course, Georgia will have its home opener week 2 against Bill Clark's UAB Blazers after the game against Clemson. But here's Josh Brooks on Twitter. I want to show this to you, talking about the situation at Sanford Stadium. He says, "You've told us that you didn't like our ice at Sanford Stadium." He says, "We've partnered with Athens' own Zaxby's." That's the free plug. Of course, some of you know most of you know what Zaxby's is. "For the best ice in the country. Now, the concession stands at all of our athletics venues will serve Coca-Cola products with Zaxby's ice. Go Dogs, so cool. Details matter." Now, this is interesting to me for a couple of reasons. First of all, the ice at Sanford Stadium has always been kind of a controversial topic. You see people talk about this on message boards sometimes, but I can remember back in the 80s, my grandmother, I used to go to the games with my grandparents, my grandfather, my grandmother, and back then, she didn't like the ice. I'm talking about way back in the 1980s. Something was suspicious to her about this ice, and I just remember talking about this in 1986. I mean, this has been an issue at Georgia seemingly for quite a long time, and the fact that Josh Brooks says, "Hey, we've heard you on this, and we're going to bring in well-known fast food restaurant. We're going to employ their ice. We're going to use that around here." That is just kind of a cool touch, right? And I think it's fairly well embodying some of what Brooks has kind of brought to Georgia. Whereas, the one thing you can't deny, that if you're trying to be a good AD, obviously fundraising is a big part of that. And paying very close attention to your rich donors, the people who have the most money, that's the most efficient way to raise a lot of money for a program, being very well aware what the rich folks want and meeting all their needs. It's just easier to get one person to give $100,000 than it is to get 10 people to give $10,000. That's just the way life works. Fair or not, that's just kind of the truth on that. However, what Josh Brooks seems to be about as a figure here at Georgia is, while there may be certain levers we have to pull to make rich people happy so that we get the money flowing for weight rooms and things like that, that doesn't mean that we can't do simple touches that are going to benefit the average fan who doesn't have $100,000 to give to the program but wants to support Georgia the way that he can or she can by coming to some of these games. Let's do some things for them there as well. And it kind of reminds me of an interview that Brooks gave to an outlet called Front Office Sports a couple of years ago. This is back before he was Georgia athletic director. Back then he was just kind of stadium operations type guy. But if you ever go around the concourse at Sanford Stadium, you see like the Run Lindsey Run or the OU Herschel Walker, or a lot of the kind of more retro-looking signs and pictures, murals that have been put up around the stadium that kind of harken back to the great moments in Georgia football history. That's one of those things that Brooks kind of undertook back then as a way of just making the stadium look better. And the ice thing is just a way for like the person who goes up and buys themselves a soft drink. You just want it to taste good, right? You want it to, look good in your cup that you're holding on to. And there's not a lot of money to be made by that. It's just kind of a nice thing to do for your average fans. It's kind of a little thing for the common fan, and stuff like that ought to matter around Georgia. For Brooks, it seems it does. In fact, let me let you have a clip here just briefly from that interview that Brooks did with Front Office Sports this is like way back in 2018. He's not athletic director at the time, but it gives you an idea for the mindset that I think that he brings to him as UGA AD. And this is one of the things, right now, not a lot of Georgia fans probably even know who Josh Brooks is. He's only been on the job for a little bit, but I think eventually he's going to grow to be popular because of attitudes like this. This is the kind of thing that Georgia fans ought to celebrate when they hear it. Here's Josh Brooks.
And obviously this is not something you're going to get a direct return on investment, but that's not the reason behind this. You're not going to get someone that's going to, spend more money at the concession stand or whatever, but it's a feel good. And, the bottom line is when you have a venue that seats 92,000, it's not always easy to get them in and out. It's going to be tough to park. Traffic's going to be tough. Sometimes concession lines are going to be long, restroom lines are long. So anything we can do from this end to make their experience a little better is important. So again, there may not be a direct return on investment on these things, but sometimes you have to look past the direct ROI on something and believe that you're making the experience better.
I know it's weird to have the music in the background. I honestly don't know why they put music underneath the interview, but nonetheless, that attitude from Brooks that he talked about in 2018 in that particular moment, that's a reference to just making the concourses look better. Now, some of you say certain parts of them could be wider, but it is an old stadium. It's been around since 1929. People are just bigger now than they used to be. But the point is, when Brooks says, hey, not everything we do is going to be about ROI. Not everything we do is going to be about maximizing profits. Some of the things we do are just going to be about making the fan experience better. And I got to tell you, I think that's a pretty good attitude, and Georgia fans ought to notice it. They ought to celebrate it, because think about brands that you really like, whether it be restaurants or amusement parks or some of the things that you maybe resonate with. The thing that sometimes makes you feel connected to those things are the ways in which they seem to be trying to create a little magic here and there and not make everything be about every extent possible to maximize profits. Because when it's all about profits, when it's all about making money and cutting corners and reducing expenses and things like that, you have a way of noticing, right? As human beings, we just kind of notice that thing. But when it's the opposite, when it's just a little bit better ice or a little bit nicer looking concourses or a little bit more comfortable seating or whatever it ends up being for the average fan, cleaner bathrooms in some cases, whatever it ends up being, it may not make Georgia more money, but it makes Georgia fans happier. And the fact that the Georgia athletic director right now seems someone interested in wanting to do that, I think that's the kind of thing that Georgia fans ought to notice and they ought to celebrate. That is Around the Doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Serve Pro. Of course, Georgia calls Sanford Stadium home, but you have your own home to think about and worry about. And one of the things at some point in time that you may have to deal with is some sort of damage. And frequently this kind of damage is caused by like fire or water intrusion. I mean, that's a kind of a scary thing to think about, but the fact is it could happen to you there as well. Well, here's the good news. Whatever seems scary about this, if you're watching on video, you see some cool stuff there, all the great equipment from our friends at Serve Pro. Whatever seems scary about this actually doesn't have to be quite as scary as it might seem when it comes to all of this, because actually the restoration experts at Serve Pro can get all of this back for you literally like it never even happened. That's the thing that ServPro is good at. They are good at restoring your home, making the damage literally go away. It's almost like a magic trick. They make it go away. They make your home look as if the damage never even happened. I love ServPro for that. Of course, all of their franchises are independently owned and operated there as well. That means you're doing business with folks who understand, the family-owned business, the service part of all this there as well, and they're just really, really adept, restoration experts, repairing that damage, fire, water, all the things that might come with that. So go to the website, servpro.com. That's spelled, if you're listening, radio podcast, SERV, servpro.com. Check them out and find out what they can do for you today if you need restoration for fire damage or water damage, anything like that. ServPro can take good care of you. All right, it's great to have you with us here today on DawgNation Daily. We got a lot to do before we're done. There was kind of a scary moment involving a Georgia player yesterday, or at least this week, I should say. It seems like everything is fine, but boy, we're certainly glad of that. We'll have to tell you about that story before we're done. But for now, we got a lot to do. Georgia-Clemson coming up next Saturday. A lot to think about how the Dogs get that win. So let's talk to our buddy Terrence Edwards, the great former Georgia wide receiver, and we'll see if we can figure it out here over the course of the next few minutes. Good to have you with us on the program today there as well.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, really good stuff with Terrence Edwards. Always happy to have the former Georgia wide receiver on board for what we're doing here. And what we're doing right now is thinking about that upcoming season opener there against Clemson. Terrence, I talked about this a couple minutes ago before you joined us, and I know you and I have talked about this before too. It's like, you and the guys who were seniors with you or on that team there in 2002, y'all have a special perspective about this game next Saturday because you know what it feels like to open the season against Clemson. You know what it feels like to get a win against Clemson. For those of us who grew up in Georgia, we know that, listen, Clemson's closer to UGA than almost any other SEC school is. I think Auburn's kind of right there in the same vicinity in terms of, the number of minutes it takes to get there. But Clemson is literally right in UGA's backyard. These two teams ought to be playing more in future years. They're going to be. But if anybody understands why Clemson's a big game and why it feels good to beat the Tigers, someone like you who had that experience in 2002 certainly feels that way, right?
Oh, most definitely. We knew that there was a big game. We knew that Clemson's right up the street, and it's kind of a bragging right, even though we don't play them annually. But it was a good start of the season. I think these guys here, with the advent of social media, knows a lot of these guys. There's a lot of Georgia residents on this team, so it's a bragging right, and it's a big game for what Clemson has done the last 3 years.
And I think one of the themes of our show here the last couple of days, too, Terrence, has been, listen, I think people have put, whether it be the Darnell Washington injury, the Tyke Smith injury, I think most Georgia fans, at least for now, have kind of put that behind them. And I think Georgia fans now are kind of looking to see, okay, well, what is available for the game against Clemson, and what's the recipe that can potentially lead to a victory there? And obviously a receiver that you know very well, Jermaine Burton, I think factors into that pretty heavily. I think it's kind of cool that Burton, after only being a freshman a year ago, and he has the huge game against Mississippi State and kind of showed up big in a few other moments of the season there as well, but a guy that was inexperienced, coming into last season, still got the nod from the coaches, got a third-team All-SEC pick that came out this week. And, boy, if you're thinking about those guys that could really break out against Clemson, who could really burst onto the scene on a big national TV stage on that Saturday night, a guy like Burton, who got the All-SEC nod a little earlier this week, you kind of have to start with a guy like that of really having the potential to do that, right?
Oh, most definitely. I think he's the guy that got to display a big ability to make plays on all three levels. That's the screen game, the 80-minute passes, or deep pass. I think he's going to be able to affect the passing game that way. But I'm really looking for a guy like Arian Smith, to be utilized a lot this game. I just think his speed is going to be a factor in this game down the field. If we really want to utilize and help the passing game without Darnell Washington being in effect, we have to have a guy like Arian Smith affecting the deep safeties and those talented freshmen like Brock Bogers really working underneath. So I really look for a guy like Arian Smith to really affect this game, not just catching passes, just being able to affect coverage with his speed. Yeah,
I think that I love the way you said that and affect the coverage because, I'm not an X's and O's expert, and I'm certainly not a former player and current coach the way that you are, but like the one thing that I think of if I'm like a Marcus Rosemy Jack Saint or if I'm a Justin Robinson or someone like that, I like the idea of playing off of, Arian Smith. Sometimes in basketball, we think of the idea of a two-man game, pick and roll things like that. I like the idea of kind of running underneath an Arian Smith, right? Using my strength, my size, or my just route running ability to take advantage of a defense that's possibly softened up because, Arian is such a speedster, such a guy that blows the top off a defense. So, I like the idea of Arian catching one streaking down the sideline or something like that. But if I'm a receiver, I also like the idea of playing off of him a little bit too, don't I?
Oh, most definitely. He's like that guy that, the old adage is, he's going to take the top off the coverage. If you don't put a guy underneath and over the top, he's going to run by anybody. I don't care who it is right now. So all the other receivers have the underneath abilities to make catches underneath and make plays with yards after catch. Brock Bowers, I think, is a guy that could really help us, especially when you have linebackers or safeties covering this guy. And we have all heard the buzz about him. So without Darnell Washington not being there right now, I just think Arian Smith is a guy that could really affect the game without catching a pass.
No, I think that's exactly right. And, obviously, some of the guys we talked about in that kind of tight end role are like the 5-star athlete type variety, the kind of guys that may only see once in a generation. And to a degree, Bowers may not quite be in that category in some people's mind. But listen, we've heard when Todd Monken spoke the other day, he spoke a lot about Bowers. And if you're thinking about, really athletic, kind of like the flex-in style tight end, actually, maybe in a way, and you said this yourself, the buzz about Bowers has grown throughout this offseason. Maybe in terms of that really athletic flex-in style player, maybe Bowers shouldn't take that much of a – he's obviously young and inexperienced. You can't discount that. But other than that, maybe he shouldn't take a backseat to some of the other guys that we've talked about potentially filling that role because most of the country would love to have an athlete of the caliber of Bowers doing some of the things that Georgia may have a chance to let him do coming up against Clemson, right?
Oh, I think so. I think you have to unleash him. Even with Darnell, if he was able to play, I think you still find ways to get that kid the ball. I think he's a dynamic playmaker. He's a big receiver. He just happens to be in a 235 to 40-pound how much weight. He just happened to be in a big body. But I love him. I went down to watch he catch the ball naturally. I love everything about him. So he's going to be a guy that we have to count on in this Clemson game to beat them. You just look at now, the focus is going to be him at the tight end position. Now he has to come up big. This is why he came to Georgia to play in these type games.
I want to ask you about the Georgia running backs in a moment. Before that, let me remind folks that you're heading towards the weekend. You're thinking about pizza. Of course, someone like me thinking about pizza all the time. Well, listen, Marco's Pizza is the pizza you ought to be thinking about, whether it's the authentic crust, the 3 cheeses blended together on top of that crust, or the great savings. Right now, you can get a bundle of a large one-topping pizza, pizza bowl, cheesy bread. By the way, the pizza bowl is like the pizza flavor, not the crust. You get that along with the cheesy bread, all just $21.99. That's incredible savings. Check it out on the Marco's app or online at marcos.com. Marco's Pizza lovers get it. Of course, some participation may vary, so check out the additional restrictions that may apply and all that in store for details when it comes to Marco's Pizza on all of that. Marco's app or marcos.com to take advantage of that great savings. So, Terrence, here's the thing that I've said a few times, and we talked about this a lot on the show yesterday, that I'm excited about the young receivers or maybe receivers in a bigger role this year, what we get a chance to see. But also against Clemson, man, you got to pull out every stop, right? You got to do everything you can to win that game. And for me, that means seeing more of what we saw on G-Day, which is JT Daniels throwing to running backs. Daniels talked about there that day, the Georgia running back position, maybe the deepest position group on this team right now. And seeing those guys be more than just guys who tote the rock, but seeing them be weapons in the passing game. That's what Clemson did last year with Travis Etienne. That's what Alabama did a year ago with Najee Harris. And to me, it seems like a recipe for a Georgia victory against Clemson would potentially feature a lot of throws to, guys like Zamir and Kendall and Kenny McIntosh and obviously James Cook, who's probably the most adept at that right now. What do you come down on seeing these running backs be weapons in the passing game?
Oh, I love it. I think when you have a running back who's just not a guy who carries the ball in between the tackles, that you get him out in space. This game is about spacing right now. And the best teams right now, you just think about the last few years, is Alabama and Najee Harris. He just not only, ran the ball, he caught the ball. And with LSU, the Edwards Clyde-Helaire was another guy that was a threat out the backfield. So it brings a different element to the game. Now you got linebackers trying to cover guys that are used to catching balls down the field, not just screen passes. I would love to see Kenny McIntyre and James Cook run a lot of wheel routes this game just to get those linebackers out the box and in space.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to think of. Let me finish with this just from if you don't mind. When you look at Clemson on the wide receiver side, I'm not quite sure how much you've even had a chance to break down that group as of yet, but I think it's fair to point out that T. Higgins isn't there anymore, right? I mean, some of the big names that we've known as Clemson wide receivers, they're either not there or, in the case of Justin Ross, coming back from injury. Now, listen, Terrence, Ross is a tremendous player, and I root for him to be healthy, and, I want to watch that young man play because he's fun to watch. I have to say, though, that just given the health challenges I think that he's been through, the idea that he's going to be 100% healthy and as much of a weapon against Georgia as we saw him be, like, say, as a freshman back in 2018, my assumption is that he's maybe not quite at that level for that season opener next Saturday. What do you think when you look on the other side there at Clemson in terms of what DJ Uiagalelei is going to be throwing to? Let me start with this. How healthy do you think that someone like Ross can expect to be for a game like this? And just, beyond that, what Clemson does when they throw to some of these targets?
Well, let me say Justin, if was healthy, Justin Ross, he would definitely be a first-round draft pick. That's how ultra-talented he is. So I have connected a few times with him on Twitter, just wishing him the best because, I hate to see a kid get hurt like that with the potential to go and make a lot of money for his family. But they have a lot of guys on that roster. I mean, Clemson receivers, they go after a particular receiver. They have big receivers, 6'3" to 6'4" range, because they throw a lot of deep balls. They throw a lot of 50-50 balls where they're allowed those DBs to go up. They try to put you in a situation where you're man coverage with that running game now, and put big receivers out on a boundary to go one-on-one 50-50 ball. That's basically their offense with a lot of RPOs. So they got a lot of talent. They're just young. They're not inexperienced, and they're not guys that I can say right now are wide receiver ones. Justin Ross is a wide receiver one. So now they're just looking for guys to step up, and Clemson have done a great job of replacing guys when they leave, like T. Higgins. And they got some guys, we just don't know them yet. And I'm interested to see who's going to be that guy if Justin Ross is not able to play.
I tell you what, Terrence, always great to hear from you. Thank you so much for your insight on this game. And, of course, a lot of your expertise has been earned by working hard with football players on the individual basis, obviously on Friday nights and the high school football there as well. You're just deeply involved in all of that. And I love letting folks know that, because, listen, they're young football players. They want to get better at their craft. And that goes beyond just what you do September, October, November. That's really 12 months out of the year. You got to work to be as good as, gosh knows, these Georgia high school kids are also good. You got to be working, around the clock to keep up with them sometimes. And so, you certainly do that with your own personal coaching for next generation wide receivers and pass catchers. Remind folks, Terrence, how they can get in touch with you.
You can find me on all social media platforms at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Terrence, great stuff. Thanks for being with us. Can't wait for that post-game show coming up after that Clemson game. More thoughts from you then. Of course, we'll get a chance to check in with you before the game there as well. So appreciate your time and look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks, B.A.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
By the way, speaking of high school football, looking forward to Friday night. It's back on Peachtree TV again, of course, streaming on CBS46.com for what they call the Great Atlanta Bash. Last week we did the Corky Kell Classic, and we were kind of all over the state of Georgia, certainly around the city of Atlanta, including Mercedes-Benz on Saturday for a big series of games. Kind of another version of that in town in Atlanta this weekend. The game that I'm calling is on Friday. There are also two games on Saturday there as well. I'm looking forward to my game on Friday, though. And, it's amazing. This game actually had to be kind of scheduled kind of quickly here, because of some challenges and some issues that are going on. But North Atlanta there at, last week we were at City Park in Gainesville, which I think is one of the great stadiums for high school football in this state. Of course, I'm, a Hall County resident, or I should say a native. I don't live in Hall County anymore. I'm a Hall County native. So I grew up going to City Park a whole bunch, and so it was fun to be there for a game last week. And it is just a beautiful venue for high school football. And I feel the same way about Henderson Stadium, where we're going to be at coming up this weekend, right there kind of in the shadow of Piedmont Park. Just a unbelievably cool venue a great spot for high school football and a really good game we're going to have between North Atlanta and Thurl on Friday night. And there are 2 more games on Saturday, but I've got North Atlanta versus Thurl on Friday. Having a chance to be with both these coaches this week, just guys who are just rolling up their sleeves and doing great work, building programs, contributing to the high school football community in our state and around the city of Atlanta. So it's all brought to you by Score Atlanta. Score Atlanta is obviously, and you trust them for high school football news now for a great number of years. And they also help put these TV broadcasts on. Watch it Friday and Saturday on Peachtree TV. Stream it on CBS46.com. It's going to be a ton of fun. All right, let's move into our SEC through here for a moment. And y'all know that we don't get into like controversial topics around here. This is the break from that. And I'm very committed to that. You know, you're going to see Herschel Walker run for U.S. Senate. You know, we'll talk about Herschel as a football player. If Herschel's ever an elected official and he wants to come on the show and basically, you know, do some official government business, we'll obviously give him a platform to do that. We've done that for elected officials before. But in terms of talking about the politics part of it, we're just not going to do that. Whether you're for it, against it, whatever else, we're just not. We want DawgNation to be a place where everybody feels comfortable. And so other kind of controversial topics, you know, we just going to steer clear from there as well. They're important to follow. It's important to, you know, form opinions, but the platform to express those opinions is somewhere else. So controversial topics, for the most part, we stay away from. Every now and then they do kind of really bleed in the direction of football, where you at least have to acknowledge what's going on. And you know, there's been something going on for a couple of days we haven't really talked about very much, but in terms of how it potentially affects football, I think you got to pay attention to this. Some of you are aware of the fact that Auburn coach Brian Harsin has tested positive for the COVID-19. He's tested positive, and when pressed by reporters on the Auburn program, has not said yet whether he's vaccinated. Won't say about that. The Auburn vaccination rate has been a little lower, a good bit lower than a lot of the other SEC teams. Georgia's well above 90%. You got some teams in the SEC that are getting close to 100%, and Auburn is much, much lower on their vaccination rate. And Harsin himself won't say if he's vaccinated or not. Different people feel different ways about that. You know, frankly, as I said before, you know, the place for opinions on that probably somewhere else. But what's interesting, though, is to think about this solely from a football standpoint for right now. That here's a guy in Harsin who's trying to get his program started, who's, trying to become a figure in that state. And I've said this before, that think about Gus Malzahn for a moment. That Malzahn is kind of a joke to a lot of Georgia fans because Georgia beat Malzahn so much. But the truth is Gus Malzahn had way more success against Alabama than he had against Georgia, and that's obviously a huge measuring stick for Auburn, how you do against your in-state rival. And for as much success Alabama's had winning national championships, over the tenure that Gus Malzahn was at Auburn from 2013 through 2020, he actually beat him head-to-head 3 times. Beat him in 13, beat him in 17, beat him in 19. That's a lot to live up to if you're Brian Harsin. Plus, you come down here from Boise, nobody knows who you are. You kind of have that outsider, whiff to you a little bit of, well, is this guy from Idaho? Is he going to work down here in the SEC? And listen, that's a popular narrative and sometimes ends up being true. Sometimes the outsider type guy really doesn't know how to fit into the SEC culture. Some of the things that Harsin said about Alabama or said about recruiting is frankly just weird. That, it doesn't seem like he quite gets the edge you have to have as of yet. And then, you start looking at, some of the stuff that Malzahn did. That becomes a lot for a guy like Harsin to potentially live up to just to try to, succeed. And all of a sudden now you've got this other thing that people are kind of holding over him right now, saying, well, are you sure you can even run a program if you're having these kinds of issues before the season even begins? So keep your eye on what the response to Brian Harsin is. No matter how you may feel about some of the things that are going on with him, keep your eye on how he is fitting in there at Auburn. I would say thus far it's been a pretty slow start, and he has had his share of naysayers in the early going here. LEBBEUS LT Overton, one of the top players in the 2023 class, has put out a top 12 here. Georgia makes the cut here. We'll show you the graphic on the screen. This is a little bit like one of those like Joe Lunardi on the bubble things for like the NCAA tournament. There are a lot of schools on here: Ohio State, USC, Oklahoma, Florida right there next to UGA, Bama, Clemson, LSU, Kentucky, Texas A&M, Tennessee, and North Carolina. But Overton's a guy we've talked about a good bit before, and a guy that we will be talking about a lot in the time to come. A couple other stories to get to here for a moment. I've seen that it's reported that in the 2024 season, LSU and USC are going to open up that season there at the Las Vegas Raiders Stadium in Las Vegas. Now, some people hear this story and they say, well, hold on, what happened to this alliance thing? I thought the whole alliance schedule was supposed to be something to battle against the SEC, and these leagues were going to schedule games against each other, and lo and behold, you got a game just announced between USC and LSU, and I think that's kind of interesting there too. Kind of shows you the murky picture that kind of surrounds the alliance right now. But the other thing that's kind of interesting about this is, and this is going to be relevant for Georgia in the future years, that Darnell Washington's from Las Vegas, by the way, that Las Vegas is trying to be a major player on the college sports scene. And the new Pac-12 commissioner, George Clavikoff, is that his name? I may be saying that wrong. But he kind of comes from that Las Vegas world. He was a big wig at one of the the big casino outfits there in Las Vegas. And so that's deepening Vegas's ties to college sports. But they've also said the Raiders Stadium there's nice, state-of-the-art thing. It looks like something from Star Wars. I mean, it's a crazy-looking stadium. But they want to do the season opening neutral site non-conference game the way that Dallas does it, and the way that Charlotte's doing it right now for Georgia Clemson. Atlanta's been huge with this, with the Chick-fil-A stuff for a number of years. Las Vegas wants to do this there as well, and they want to do it with SEC teams against Pac-12 teams. And like what they've said is, like, when you see the Pac-12 team travel across the country and they lose these kinds of games opening season. Remember, Oregon lost in Texas to Auburn a couple of years ago, and you've seen some of these where the Pac-12 team loses the week 1, week 2 game. What they're saying is, hey, we ought to get a chance to play some of these neutral site games in the Pacific time zone and see if that's an advantage for the Pac-12. That's probably a bunch of bunk. That's probably not true. But for Georgia, who seems to like to travel and wants to be in the biggest games it can be in, and grow national brands and things like that, I would say in the very near future, much like LSU, and boy, can you imagine LSU fans in Las Vegas for a moment? My gosh, what's that going to be like? But beyond that, for Georgia fans who've been used to seeing their programs schedule the biggest games and the biggest venues, huge attention, seeking that out as much as possible, I would say in the very near future, the idea that Georgia starts a season in Las Vegas, Dog fans taking a road trip or air travel, whatever you're going to do to get there, spending some time in Las Vegas. We talked about the way that Georgia fans once took over Chicago. Can you imagine being at Binion's or Golden Nugget or one of these old school Vegas casinos, like late on a Friday night, early Saturday morning with a game that next day in the great-looking, beautiful Raiders Stadium? That is a lot to think about, and that is something that could be very much on the way for Georgia fans there pretty soon. Squeeze in one more SEC through story, by the way, there as well. So yesterday, Commissioner Greg Sankey made an appearance on the Jacksonville sports radio station 1010XL. He talked about some of the things related to the alliance and some of the things kind of basically the SEC's response to all that. And I guess the biggest news to come from it was, first of all, he pushed back on the notion that all of this is like a orchestration by ESPN to kind of take over monopoly with the college football playoff and leverage the relationship that ESPN has with the SEC to do that. He kind of pushed back on that. But he also made it pretty clear that they're looking at a scheduling model moving forward that sees more SEC teams playing the rest of the league more frequently, cycling through other stadiums more frequently. So the idea of like the Florida LSU game or the Alabama Tennessee game or possibly even the Georgia Auburn game in future years, that may be less important to the SEC than getting Georgia to College Station more frequently or something, kind of like that. Georgia still hasn't played in College Station, and I think not slated to for a few more years. A&M's only been to Athens once. But they want to change those long droughts between games in the future. So if you think about what the future of SEC scheduling is going to look like, that is certainly an idea of what that's going to be. We'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. So kind of a scary moment yesterday for Georgia defensive back David Daniel. You can read about this at DawgNation.com. Mike Griffith writes about it. And it's one of those things, like, you hate to say it because it sounds, I guess, worse than it was, but he was struck by a car. Come to find out, I think he's okay. But one of those things that when you first, I heard some rumblings about this over the course of the 2 days prior, and you're like, oh my gosh, what's going on there? So that went down. Mike has written about this there at DawgNation.com. I'm just happy. I'm just happy that things are that he's okay. I'm happy that everything is fine here, because that's one of those things that, man, could have been certainly really scary. And so thankfully that is not the case. At least it doesn't sound like when it comes to David Daniel. So good news there on a situation that could be just could have been awful, right? We got to pay attention. Make sure that we're always aware of what's around us, whatever. So I guess happy news here that it's not what it could have been there with David Daniel. Headline or just the overall description of it makes it sound awful, but come to find out maybe it's not quite that way. So read more about that at DawgNation.com, and happy to hear that David Daniel is okay after what sounded like the potential for a pretty scary incident. Now, awkward segue from that into something that's a lot more hopefully enjoyable and entertaining. I continue to be a big believer that Sam Pittman is Arkansas coach, the former Georgia offensive line coach. The personality that he brings to the table in the SEC is just a ton of fun. And, listen, for a lot of these coaches who are really convinced that super serious and never showing any personality is the way to go, acting like a robot, someone who eats, sleeps, and drinks football and no concept of just kind of relaxing and being a regular dude for a moment. Man, Sam Pittman makes those guys look like stiffs and squares by comparison. So let me show you this on the screen here. There was a viral photo that came out of Pittman recently where he's playing for Pittsburgh State. I think this is their spring game, and he's got the igloo cooler underneath him, and he's got the silver can next to him that very much look at the spot shadow arrow there, very nicely done. That obviously has a strong resemblance to an alcoholic beverage, which is not the thing you typically expect to see on the sideline. Well, Arkansas coach Sam Pittman made an appearance with Marty McGee on the SEC Network, and a breakdown of this viral photo ensued. I got to tell you, man, Pittman's a funny dude. I really like him. Take a listen to this from the SEC Network.
You were sitting on the bench, and it wasn't until I've been looking at this picture for 2 hours. All of a sudden, I was like, "Is that a Coors Light?" There's a cold silver bullet sitting right by your foot.
So that was a spring game, and I had ACL surgery, but I wanted to get out there a play or two. So I just told the left tackle, "Say, don't block me. I ain't going to make the play, but I want to just come out here for." And then after I got done, I said I'd brought the igloo.
Yeah.
And some silver bullets. And I told the fellas, I said, "Hey, I'm just going to sit over here and drink some beer, and you're more than welcome to come over here and do it with me."
I mean, I think Georgia was lucky to have him for as long as they did. It's easy to understand why Pittman's such a good recruiter. What a great personality. And, whether it be, Pittman or some of the other guys that kind of have that same vibe, don't you want college football to be more like that, more interesting personalities as head coaches, guys who seem to have a good time, enjoy their position in football? I think Pittman's a good dude there. That's really good stuff to be able to see. Hey, let me remind you of this. As we're heading towards the upcoming season, of course, with all the sporting events going on right now, baseball down the stretch, MMA, everything else, don't forget about my friends at BetUS. It's America's most favorite sportsbook. They've been doing this for more than 25 years, and you can't stick around as long as BetUS has been able to stick around if you're not taking really good care of your players. Number one sportsbook in the industry when it comes to the incentives and just making the players to play. They're glad they do. In fact, for DawgNation folks here there as well, they got a big sign-up bonus for you there as well. If you go to BetUS.com, that's obviously BETUS.com, BetUS.com, use the promo code DN125. The DN, of course, stands for DawgNation. BetUS.com, DN125. You're going to get a 125% sign-up bonus. That means you start in your account with more money than you began with before you even place your first bet. You're literally already a winner. Simple math here. If you put in $100, they're going to give you an extra $125 on top of that just for signing up with them. But you've got to use the promo code DN125 to take advantage of that. BetUS.com, promo code DN125. Get yourself a 125% sign-up bonus with BetUS. Promo code, once again, DN125. So a lot of talk about Georgia Clemson in today's show, and I'm going to give out our Gatorade roll call and our golden shoe winner today for something I saw on Twitter from our old friend Bassin Dog. For some reason, this got me really excited about the season that's on its way because, listen, when you are in the long off season, some people for sometimes makes the seasons feel like it's kind of a long way away. Well, if you're looking for some evidence that's not quite so long away anymore, we are now within the window that our buddy Bassin Dog, who's at Bassin Dog on Twitter, says that you can now record the Georgia Clemson game on your DVR. He says, "Well, I just set the DVR to record Georgia Clemson. Let's go." So if you're really looking for some evidence that we're here, that game week is almost upon us, you can check your cable or satellite provider and go ahead and get that DVR set for Georgia Clemson. We've gone inside the window for that. That's good stuff there. How about a Gator Hater countdown 65 days from now? We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. You can trust R.S. Andrews to do all of that for you. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. That means for your air conditioning unit, it's tired. It's on its last legs. Some of you know that. But here's what you also should know. There is a really good chance that R.S. Andrews can breathe some new life into that old unit. They can get it tuned back up to factory fresh specs, and it just costs you $99. So make sure you check them out today for a lot more on that. All right. Over here on Facebook first, because I started on YouTube first yesterday. We'll get a few comments, and we'll rock and roll out the door after that. And as I said yesterday, the shows are starting to get a little longer here. We've kind of blown past our... There's certain like timestamps we kind of think about as far as, when we want to hit certain things in the show. And, I mean, at this point in time, those are a little more than just a suggestion. We have just blown through all of that. All right, let me pull up the show here, and we will get going. And hope all of you are having a good time. Let's see if we can get these comments up and going here. Mike Tiffany checking in to say, by the way, Mike, thanks for sharing the show. He thinks that absolutely Arian Smith can impact the game without catching a pass, but if we'll focus on him early and hit some big deep throws, he'll impact every defense for the rest of the year. And I think that's absolutely true. I think there's a very good chance it's very much true for sure. Very much. David Thatch says, good plan to stay away from politics. Yeah, I mean, listen, to be completely honest with you, I mean, I don't sugarcoat this. This is totally self-serving, right? Because, I mean, half the people think one thing, half the people think another. Like, I can't afford to run a good business with only attracting half the audience. I got to attract everybody. So, I mean, this is completely self-serving on that front that I want, plus it's just more enjoyable to make room for everybody. And that's what I want to be able to do. So, yeah, that's kind of our thing on that. Matt Rugavina says, I need y'all to come out here to a College Station and help me deal with these Texas A&M types. We talked about this in SEC Country Live yesterday, the idea that Danny Cannell, the notorious SEC troll, has picked A&M to beat an unseeded Alabama. So there's that out there right now. Let's see what else is going on. I've kind of got the comment in kind of a weird way here. I'm not seeing them in their most frequent form. Let me get out and just see if I can start this all over again. Every time I pull up these Facebook comments, it's always a little bit weird. Let's see if I can find this again. Sorry, y'all. I apologize for that. Naturally, this is not going to be easy. Oh, goodness. All right, let's try this again. Nope. Boy, it is always something trying to pull these comments up. Oh, goodness. Let me just try it on here. Sorry about that. Give me a second, and then we'll... All right, over here on the old laptop. That sometimes works better anyway. The problem with Facebook is like, it used to be just like very easy just like to click on something. And now it's, I mean, the page has just gotten so busy that you can't even find what you're looking for. All right, there we go. I mean, Matt Rugavina says, I'm commenting on the computer today too. It's weird. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons why, I mean, I hate to say this because I try to remain somewhat platform agnostic. I want people to enjoy the show wherever they want to enjoy it. And obviously Facebook's been our longest video platform. It's the kind of thing that so many of you connect with. But I mean, almost everybody that's tried a different platform, especially the one on DawgNation.com, almost everybody seemingly has come away happier on that. And I'm just being honest with that. That like Facebook just seems to be doing everything it can to make its video experience as bad as possible. And I don't understand why that's good business, but that's just what they seem to be able to be doing. Yeah, well, I'm all fixed, Ray. I can see I'm good now. Thank you very much. Michael was going to bring me to another computer, but I'm all fixed pretty good on that. Let's see what else. Philip Jordan Wells says better than Instagram. I don't know about that. Instagram's not really, at least in my mind, a good platform for a full video. It's a good platform for short videos, things like that, but not really a good platform for a full video. Randy Hall says Stone Cold for the preferred ice. Yeah. Raymond Fossway says, would you like to apologize for putting my grandpa out of business with your derogatory ice comments? Jim's Dirt Hauling and Ice Providers has been delivering ice to San Francisco for many years. All done now. Yeah, that's kind of what a lot of people thought. I mean, like my grandmother used to say that, this is like in the 1980s, but just when you're a kid, you just remember things your grandparents say, right? She said they used to use the same shovels. Like when I was a kid, like the Coliseum, Stegman Coliseum, had stables next to it. And she used to say that they used the same shovels from the stables to shovel the ice in Sanford Stadium. Now, as a kid, I'm thinking, I've actually never even seen them shoveling ice with the shovel, but that's what she used to say. Like there was, I'm telling you, she did not like that ice. She did not like that ice. Epic Robinson, always interesting things being mentioned by him. Clarence Walker says, whoever is picking Clemson to beat Georgia, they are wrong. Clemson gets creamed by Ohio State last year. Lawrence and Etienne goes to the NFL. Well, I'm picking the Dogs by 5. Well, there you go, Clarence. And I think a lot of Georgia fans are going to agree with you. Matt Rukavina says, out here in Texas, a lot of the old saloons are actually called ice houses before refrigeration, so they'd send large blocks of ice out here. That's actually really interesting. Chad Williams brings a pretty good point. He says, we talk about ice. I lived in Europe twice. They don't use ice. It is true. If you go to like Scotland for a golf trip or something like that, you're drinking warm beer. It's not cold, right? I mean, and a lot of the people who like, some of those really, really dark, kind of British style beers, they like them warm anyway, but they're not using ice out there. It's a different kind of place, at least when it comes to that. It's one of the reasons why, sweet tea has such a deep connection to the South. But part of the reason for that is that if you want to go back to like ancient times, if you visited someone's house and they offered you sweet tea, I mean they were really offering you like a true like luxurious item, right? Because as some folks mentioned, in the old days, ice was expensive. Ice was not the kind of thing that like you just had limitless supplies of the way it seems like we do now. And sugar was the same way. So if somebody had enough ice to make tea cold, enough sugar to make it taste sweet, they were offering you their first fruits, the best they had to offer. They were offering that to you. So that's kind of why like there's such a deep connection between the South and sweet tea, because at one point in time there was no more hospitable gesture you could give than to say, hey, I've used a lot of my financial resources to get some ice and a lot of my financial resources to get some sugar, and I've used it to make this tea, and now I'm sharing with you. That's kind of where a lot of that comes from. Let's see what else. Chase and Jesse Barbie says, this is actually a really good question. Over or under 10 pass attempts to the running backs? I think 10 would be a good number. I think if we're thinking about the entirety of the backs, I think 10 would be a good number. I probably can't say it's over 10, but I wouldn't mind seeing it approach 10. I really wouldn't. By the way, Tony Henry says, I like that. He said we're going to put Clemson on ice. I like that. It's good stuff. Ben Green says, I think today's comment should be archived as how crazy the Dog fans get. We're under 10 days until kickoff. I think that's probably about right. Chad Williams says, I also quit sugar about 10 years ago. Yeah, so I've been trying to limit my sugar intake to kind of like once per week. Like once per week, my family, we go out and we get an ice cream. And that's trying to be like my only sugar intake. Because, I'm trying to lose some weight. I want to be healthy, things like that. Want to fit into the screen on the show. And it's hard. I mean, like I do it, but man, I have cravings so bad all the time. Like all I want to do is just eat a bowl of candy or, like a entire plate of cookies. I mean, that's all I want to do. It's like, sugar's got to be one of the most addictive substances in the whole world because it's all I want to do is just scarf it down all the time. Joseph Kennedy. I'm not going to read that, but that's pretty funny. Let's see what else. Anthony Foster wonders what I'm talking about. Yeah, some people always do. Jamie Kennedy says, where do you think that Clemson has an advantage over UGA, or do they have one? I think it's interesting to see perceived advantages. I mean, like the one specific advantage is if you're going to think about who's actually confronting each other on the field, I mean, I think it's safe to say that the Clemson defensive line has a perceived advantage over the Georgia offensive line. And the inverse is probably true. The Georgia defensive line probably has a perceived advantage of the Clemson offensive line. The other thing that I'll say here is, and Terrence Edwards kind of talked about this a little bit today, is that what's interesting is that Clemson is just getting the benefit of the doubt with its wide receivers. That a lot of the guys, even apart from Justin Ross, and let's just assume for a moment that Ross is healthy and capable of playing. That's obviously a real weapon. He's been cleared to play, and let's see how effective he actually is. But let's assume that you get a Justin Ross-like performance from him. You obviously need more receivers than that. And what's interesting is a lot of the Clemson guys now, these are big prospects. These are obviously Clemson recruits for a reason. But most of what they bring with the wide receiver position were not guys who had big numbers a year ago. That in a lot of ways, what Clemson is in its running back spot minus Travis Etienne from a year ago, and its wide receiver spots there as well. You have a lot of guys who just have not put up big numbers yet. Now, there's also like freshmen coming in, like Will Shipley, who could be a lot for Georgia to deal with, and like you think about like a Lynn J. Dixon, who over the course of his Clemson career has had, I would say, last year not as good a year as he had prior to all of that. But there are talented skill players. But because Clemson's been good offensively for a number of years, because they have effectively replaced key playmakers over the course of that span, there's this assumption on the part of the media. I'm not saying it's like a media bias thing. I'm just saying that it's fairly obvious because Clemson's done this before. They are being granted the assumption they will do it again, whereas because Georgia doesn't quite have the same track record offensively, it seems like there are more questions being asked about Georgia more loudly because of that very reason. Look, I haven't done any YouTube comments yet. Let me do that for a minute. Then we got to get ready to go after that because we got a big day around here. Over here on YouTube. Frank Patterson, always good to see him. D-Mart 42. Funny stuff. Croaking 123 says Clemson and UGA are built almost the same. The only advantage is to see Georgia's running backs over Clemson, the health of Clemson's wide receivers over ours. Fair point. Johnny Lester says he thinks the Clemson defensive line has an advantage and the Clemson wide receivers have an advantage. I think he means over, as of now, an untested Georgia secondary. And in this particular discussion, I do wonder how a guy like Darian Kendrick factors into that, knowing that Kendrick at least knows a little bit of that, Clemson sideline a bit. Cody Ledoux says about Georgia's victory over Cincinnati. He says, I get it, you beat them, but they're an average team. Their best player is on your bench. I think we may look back on that Cincinnati game for Cody, for Georgia, Cody, and say, that game was actually a little bit better than maybe some folks give it credit for. I mean, they're a preseason top 10 team right now. They're going to have a chance to win at Notre Dame. If they do that, then suddenly it looks a little better for Georgia. Ultimately, the perception of that win doesn't matter one way or another. I guess what I'm saying is that sometimes bowl game victories can seem like false positives, especially if you think it's, SEC team against Group of 5 team. But it's a little bit different kind of Group of 5 team. They got a highly rated quarterback. I know they lost their DC, but they, good on defense, have a chance to really win a game in South Bend. Maybe they won't, but they have a chance to. I think the Georgia victory against Cincinnati is probably a little bit better you're giving it credit for. DMart 42. Yeah, I spent too long on Facebook today. I did. But also I spent half the time even trying to get the comments to pop up. So maybe I'm failing all the way around. Let's see what else is on YouTube. Amy McVeigh says if you want to know what people ate for supper, just go on Facebook. Funny stuff. Let's see what else. Paul Moon says, why were we talking so much about ice today? It was just, honestly, I talked about ice for like 9 seconds in the show because Josh Brooks said they were getting better ice at Sanford Stadium. I talked about it for 9 seconds. Other people talked about it for 45 minutes, and then they blame me for talking about ice. So don't think those ratios are lost on me. Tim Harrell says, weird how his ice always tastes like an adult beverage at Sanford Stadium. Mike D says, can't wait to see Scene and Ringo smoking those Clemson. Yeah. I mean, I'm I'm very interested in Georgia's secondary, and part of as I get more interested about it, part of that is the fact that it does seem like Keely Ringo is back fully healthy, and the 5-star prospect that we were hoping to see last year, you may get a chance to really see that guy, the athleticism that he put on display back there at Saguaro High School in Arizona. You may get a chance to see that here this year. Paul Moon says, I doubt Danny Cannell actually believes all his wild stuff that he says. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, there is an element of like the hot take industry that's really basically professional wrestling. And I've said this before, Cannell, his like anti-SEC shtick, it's probably a pretty smart career ploy, right? Because, I mean, it's one thing to be like the former Florida State quarterback. There's 8,000 guys who were former college quarterbacks trying to do the media thing, and frankly, for the most part, they're indistinguishable from each other. But if you're the loudest anti-SEC voice out there, I mean, you're going to get a lot of attention for that, especially from SEC fans, which is probably the biggest collective fan base of them all. So I actually don't fault the hustle in some respects. If that's the gimmick, the shtick that he wants to use to get some attention. I mean, everybody's got mouths to feed. Everybody's got families to feed. So if that's his way of doing it, I actually can't be that mad at him for pulling it off. By the way, Yita Cookie, going back to the topic of how many times that Georgia will throw to the running backs, said he actually thinks it could be over 10 because the Clemson defensive line bringing pressure, that JT could be forced to dump it off more quickly. And we heard from JT on that topic on yesterday's show that he's very comfortable doing that. He has no problem doing that over and over again. But that's actually an interesting point from Yeet there on that. Let's see what else. Let's get a couple more. We're going to get ready to go. Johnny Lester says Munkin's going to unveil brand new offensive sets and play designs that Clemson's not prepared for. Boy, you hope so. That's why you bring him in. I mean, Georgia needs that pre-snap schematic advantage, setting up players for positions to succeed. I don't think Georgia's had enough of that offensively, and I think that Todd Monken has a chance to really provide that. Austin Kilby says a lot of the people out weren't at UGA before the summer. Why are people down on UGA's chances? Not much has changed. Your take? Yeah, I actually don't think that the media-wise, I mean, I gave you the Pro Football Focus thing during the show, but honestly, that, largely speaking, I don't think the media softened much on Georgia throughout all of this. I mean, you don't see a huge change in Georgia based on some of the stuff that's gone on. We said on the show before that I think some Georgia fans are obviously dejected by the number of injuries that Georgia has had, but I mean, think about broad voices like Paul Feinbaum or more analytics type, people. For the most part, their tune on Georgia really hasn't changed. They still expect them to be a playoff contender. And, I haven't really heard a lot of really loud opinions one way or another in the Georgia-Clemson game. I think anything that's too loud or too specific about that game is all just bluster and bravado, and it's not the kind of thing I'm really interested in all that much. This is a close, narrow game between, two teams that I expect to both be really good. And, Georgia could win, Clemson could win. I know that's not, the kind of hot take that generates a lot of interest in a show like this. But if you're going to convince me that either team is going to win convincingly, you're going to have to really cite some strong evidence as to why. Pro Football Focus failed to do that. And thus far, anybody else who's even attempted to, make some strong case for one team having a clear edge over the other. Honestly, it just sounds like, talk about pro wrestling. It just sounds like you're cutting a promo more than it sounds like you're really giving me anything of value. G. Greg Spammer Boy checking in to say a bad offensive line can make a great quarterback look terrible. Yeah, I mean, listen, obviously Georgia's going to have to, get it done with the offensive line against a very good Clemson defensive front. Richard D says, has Georgia played in the Charlotte Stadium before? Yeah, I guess 2014 Belk Bowl, one of the great days in Nick Chubb's career at Georgia, running all over Todd Grantham's Louisville defense. I think that's the only time that Georgia's played in Charlotte, at least the only time in a long time that Georgia has played in Charlotte, maybe ever. DMart42, thanks for being here and hope you have a great day. Thomas Tyson says we played UNC in Charlotte. Well, in 2016, they played them in Atlanta. What year are you talking about, Thomas? Maybe I don't know about that. Let's see what else. We got to get ready to go. Pretty good comments rolling through all the way around. Let me do one more on Facebook, then we'll get ready to go. Good comments over here today there as well. Brian Lindsay checking out for today. Good to see you. Peter Jeffrey Wilson remembering back to that Belk Bowl. Bill Sanders says if you can cut a decent promo, you can probably get over. That is indeed the case. That is indeed the case. Marshall Fleming says Clemson set up like a team of 5+ years ago. Our defense is set up for them. I can't wait to see how that defense does it. Isaac Cruz says, yeah, I mean, like the whole Facebook thing is just ice now. That's all there is. I'm glad they're having fun, but that's all there is. But Marshall, I think you're bringing up a pretty good point. Joe Moody on Kirby's first game against North Carolina. Chubb had a great game that day there too. The big touchdown run there at the end. And the thing I always remember about that is that Ryan McGee, the ESPN commentator, who was not as well known then as he is now because of the, speaking of gimmicks and shtick, doing the Southern shtick gimmick on SEC Network. But back then, he made a little bit of a stink because he predicted the North Carolina running back, whose honestly name I don't even remember, was going to be better than Nick Chubb. That ended up being a disastrous prediction. But that was kind of the thing going into that game. You know, Chubb had doubters. Chubb had a huge game. But what's funny is that Nick Chubb never really replicated that success, I don't think, in any other point in time in the 2016 season. But, man, he looked great against North Carolina. He did. All right, anything else on YouTube before we go? Let's see what else. Paul Moon, Jay Shipes, and others. Yeah, I don't think there's anything new to report on Eric Gilbert right now. I think the situation is what it has been. And, you know, I just think that for now, Georgia's focused on getting ready to play Clemson, and that would seem to not include Eric Gilbert here at the moment. But I'm guessing we will hear something on that at some point in time. But information, as Georgia gets closer and closer to game week, information is going to get tighter and tighter and tighter. But for now, I don't have any reason to think anything's changed on that with the Gilbert front. And listen, I asked Terrence about it. I mean, to be completely honest with you, I asked Terrence about Eric Gilbert every single week. I thought I'd give him a break from having to talk about Gilbert there today. But that's kind of what I did. All right, let's get ready to go. Good stuff all the way around. Y'all make sure you check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, by the way, at ajc.com. And you can keep up, talk about high school football stuff. The AJC's got really, really deep, unparalleled high school coverage for all the big games around the city of Atlanta, the state of Georgia. That's always a great thing to check in on there, too. And, of course, all kinds of interesting stuff there as well, whether it be, the Falcons and their final approach to these preseason games before the season gets ready to get started, the Arthur Smith era off and running, and, more look at Herschel Walker running from the U.S. Senate. That's an important thing to pay attention to, even though we're not really talking about that much around here. Of course, Braves getting back in action there, too, after a really frustrating game the other night against the New York Yankees. But you can follow all of that with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution online at ajc.com. Also, our friends at R.S. Andrews talked to Dara yesterday. We're looking forward to go with the flow next week, getting back to picking some games. That is going to be a bunch of fun. And R.S. Andrews can also help you out when you're not having much fun at home with a plumbing issue of some sort. Let's say your water heater goes out. The great news is, in many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace that for you the same day. Just find them online at rsandrews.com. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We'll get going at 10 a.m., and we'll see you then.